Anna.
Hey, Alex.
When we first spoke, you talked a bit about how you came to radio, and it was just super inspirational. The whole concept of a calling, I think, was the term that you used. Would you mind sharing a bit of that with our audience? Just the concept of like this calling and how you came to do the lovely work that you do.
For sure. So I grew up in the church. So a lot of stuff I say sound from it like it's from the church. And so when I say a calling, for me that means it's something that wouldn't let me go. So I've done a lot of things in my life. I've had a career. But I could never let go of this passion I had to tell the stories of queer folks and to tell the stories of queer folks of color. It's something I was doing for free for a very long time, over a decade. I wasn't making any money doing it. It was just something I wanted to do. Um, and oftentimes people would think that I was doing it full time. Like, don't you do the station full time? No, not at all. This is nights. This is a weekend situation. And as I reflect on it, and it was just very clear to me that it's because it's what I was supposed to be doing all along. And so that's why I call it a call, because I feel like I'm living in my purpose. There is a wonderful book that I read when I quit corporate America to do this full time and to be a full time social entrepreneur. It's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And it's such a great book for anybody looking to make that big leap in life because he talks about these limiting beliefs that we have, but he also talks about working in these zones. And the two that I remember always is the zone of excellence and the zone of genius. And he talks about how most times people are working in their zone of excellence. Whatever you're doing is really easy for you to do. It may not bring you joy every day, but you can get the job done and you're making a living. Maybe you're fairly happy. But he says very few people choose to take the leap of faith to live in their zone of genius every day. And I feel like that's what I was doing for a decade, is that I was living in my zone of excellence. I wasn't far away from the work I was doing, but what was taking up most of my energy was excellence. I think something I could do in my sleep. But to get to my zone of genius, it was going to take a lot of risk, a lot of faith to be able to do what I'm passionate about and what I feel like I'm called to do every single day, to be in that zone of genius. And so that is why I call it a call, because I feel like I'm living my purpose in that way.
It sounds like you answer that call.
I answered it, child. Sometimes I want to hang up the phone, but yeah.
It is what it is. It's not always easy. Now, living the dream, it's not always easy, but it is just like a gift. Anyways, another thing that you brought up when we spoke was the first time you did an audience survey, you found that your following was predominantly white gay men. How did that feel, and did that change anything in your approach?
It was wild. I was like, oh wow, white gay men are listening to me. It's not an audience that I went out and sought for. And so it was interesting that those were the folks who were listening. I intentionally didn't put my face on the cover of the artwork because I didn't want to be the face of the art of the news, right? I wanted the stories to speak for themselves. And so I intentionally left my face off. And so to hear that a lot of white gay men were listening, I was like, I wonder if it's because my face isn't on there. Like, it's just very clear this is queer news. But then that might just keep them for an episode, but they must be coming back because they enjoy what I'm saying or they appreciate how I'm reporting on the news and providing value, probably providing perspectives that they don't get to hear very often. And I think that that's what's really beautiful about radio and how podcast is able to deepen those relationships and those stories because they don't have to listen to engage with me. They don't have to listen to respond, right? Oftentimes people hear you and they're just waiting to respond. This is a situation where I'm talking. You just get to take it all in. And hopefully it's providing some insight to you that you didn't get before. I am absolutely reporting on the news. And when I first started, I was um, trying to be the true and blue journalist that I was taught to be and just report on the stories, provide you the facts, and move to the next story. And it got harder and harder for me to do that because the foolishness was heavy. And at some point I just had to break that and say, I have to report on the facts. And also I'm going to tell y'all what I think about this. And that type of freedom while having a news podcast, I think adds some value that maybe they don't get in other places. But yeah, it was a complete shock to me. I said, okay, well, hello.
And on the subject of, being a woman of color, a queer woman of color in radio, can you tell us about the Cube? I noticed that are you wearing a Cube hoodie right now?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Absolutely. Our tagline is there's no place like the cube. And that is real. And that's why I wanted to create this space. So the Cube is our podcast production company and platform where we center and celebrate BIPOC and QTPOC voices. And today there is no space created inside of podcasting for BIPOC and QTPOC voices. There's nowhere where it's centering those podcasts. And for a lot of people, they like the analogy there's no BET of podcasting. There just isn't. And I feel like that is a huge void, because when I go into these other podcasting apps, I don't see me. I don't see us. I see what mainstream says is popular. And child, that's not what I want to listen to. And so I wanted to create a space where people could go in, choose their identities, self select, choose what they love to listen to. And then our algorithm and our technology can then pair them up with podcasts that seem to align with their interests. And I think there's a lot of power in that. I think it's needed, and I'm actively building it. So we started with the platform, trying to build an app that didn't work. So we switched to a web platform that people can go visit today and begin discovering podcasts at thecube.app, THEQUBE.app. And then we dropped our first slate of podcasts last year, which is wonderful. And I'm excited about the content we're creating that we call Cube Originals. And now I'm also looking to go back to the app creation, because that need for that platform still very much so exists. So I'm out here fighting for the possibility of the thing.
I love the idea of the cube because everything you were saying, I was like, ditto, 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 clock it, because like it's very hard to find Black podcast voices, and like I want to hear people that are talking about the things that like I know as an artist, like the plays I like to watch, the movies I like to watch, the TV I like to watch, the podcasts I like to listen to is Black voices because those are the voices that resonate with me, especially like podcasts because they're just two people talking, and um it's like sometimes it feels as though Black people live on a completely different planet, and it's it's through these podcasts and through the art, it's like somebody who lives on the same planet as me. I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, and I also think it's beautiful that like on queer news, there's this emphasis on not always highlighting the tragedy and the despair of queer people because we see it and we know it exists. But I think queer celebration and queer resistance and queer joy is just as if not more important to highlight and celebrate. I think that's beautiful. But well, not but yes, and my question is, your journey started around like 2009. So like we're way back in the day. Um, and the world has changed since then. So in some ways for the better, some ways for the worst. And I want to ask, what was your journey um, as a influencer and creative from 2009 to 2024, and how the internet has changed, the world has changed, and you were talking about purpose. And have you ever felt like maybe I'm on the wrong track? Maybe this ain't my purpose.
Oh yeah, Sam. I have definitely felt in the child. I don't even want to count the years, because yeah, 2009 was a long time ago. I, I can't count the times, how many times I felt like I wasn't doing the right thing, or maybe I should be taking a different approach, right? Especially when you see the success of others, and it's so easy for us to compare ourselves to other people. And I was seeing the success of all my colleagues because they were doing it full time. I wasn't taking that into account at all. But I was like, dang, they really blowing up. Why can't I blow up like that? And there was a time when I started E3 Radio where our logo was not a rainbow. Our logo was white and purple. And I was not interested in talking about queer stuff. I was interested in talking about Black stuff. And I remember this lunch I had with a homie who I actually just saw recently. And she remembers this conversation too. We talked about this before. She was like, Anna, your station should just be queer. The queer community needs a station. You should just be a queer station. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Because once people hear it's queer, they ain't gonna hear nothing else. And I was like, I'm not sure I want to go down that road because they will erase all the other identities I have. She's like, I'm telling you, you need to have a queer station. And she was a PR marketing person. She was speaking from her expertise, child. And I just wasn't ready to do it. And then I started the show and I quickly realized everybody I was having on this doggone show was queer. And it wasn't intentional. It was just the people who I wanted to talk to. And I looked up one day and I said, she was right. I went and I colored in the whole radio tower with rainbows and said, we are queer radio done right. And and that's how that came to be. And there was also a time where I thought maybe I need to change the name. Like maybe I just need to say LGBT radio station. Like maybe I just need to be very clear that this is who we are. Because I saw all of these other publications and their names are all very queer. And E3 Radio does not necessarily say queer. Um, and I had brought up to a few people and they were like, if you don't keep that name the same, and they kind of gave me this look and this scolding. And I quickly realized that it's about the brand, not the name. And it's about me continuing to do the work that I set out to do, and that's going to be all right. And E3 will still resonate with people without LGBTQ or rainbow or any of the other alphabets in the name to designate who we are, because the brand will begin to speak for itself. But that took some getting around, and that was a time when that happened too. So yeah, this road is not a straight one. It is this road, no pun intended, but there is no queer path to one's success. I'm very clear about that. Like everybody's path and journey is very different, and definitely getting out of the comparison game and being focused on my own journey and being grateful for their success, right? While I'm showing up and continuing to do the work. So yeah, it's been a lot over the last 15 years. I think that's the number, if I'm doing math correctly, on the stages and iterations and how we've shown up in the work. But I think one thing that has been very consistent is a commitment to storytelling. It's been a commitment to spreading what I think are powerful LGBTQ stories in our community that aren't often shared or heard. If anything, that has been the most consistent thing. And if I keep going back to my why, then I'll be okay, you know?
Yes, yes, yes. It's really really important to me that like getting connected with an outside voice that's also very very interested in telling queer stories and Black queer stories and platforming queer joy. All things that are very very important to me.
So tell us about the episode. Change the pattern. The AIDS quilt travels the South with purpose.
Yeah, so this story came about because on the podcast, I reported about the AIDS quilt being on display in San Francisco. And it was going to be the first display of the AIDS quilt and the largest display ever in San Francisco. And I said it on the podcast haphazardly. Oh, I would love to go and cover it, but I ain't got the money to go to San Francisco. Haphazardly. Forgot I even said it. Went to TikTok, and one of my listeners was like, hey, Anna, I didn't see the video about the AIDS quilt, but I'll give you $1,000 to go cover it. I was like, yeah, right. So, like, who says that on TikTok? So I responded back and I was like, oh, thank you. If you're serious, send me an email. My email is in the bio. Like, that's the general response on TikTok. And she emailed me. She was dead serious. She emailed me and she was like, hey, Anna, I just want to check in. Are you serious about going? I want to give you $1,000 to go. I told my wife, and she was like, "Oh," I was like, "Do you think other people will support me? Because $1,000 is not going to get me from Chicago to San Francisco to cover this thing." She said they might, and it was at that moment that I started my Queer News podcast membership, and I called it the Q Crew. And I've used the Q Crew over the years on E3 Radio, and it just felt like a good fit for this membership. And I was like, y'all, and I just put it out there to the world, like, hey, I got this $1,000 donation to go to San Francisco, cover this story. If y'all want to help support me, please donate. And that was the beginning of the Q Crew. They funded me to go cover this story because I had never seen the AIDS quilt in person. I had never seen it. And I wanted to see it. And I also wanted to cover the largest iteration in San Francisco history. And so that's how this started. And doing my research, there were two people I wanted to talk to when I got there. It was Jada Harris and Dwayne Kramer. They were the two Black people on the team of the National AIDS Memorial. And I wanted to talk to them about their work and what they were doing. And I came to learn about the Change the Pattern campaign, in which they had gotten a government grant, $1 million grant to travel the South because of the disparity in the storytelling. So end to end, the quilt is like 53, 54 miles long. And at that time, less than a mile was dedicated to Black stories. That was a staggering stat when we consider how HIV/AIDS has impacted Black and Brown communities. The fact that less than a mile told those stories, that needed to be changed. And that's what they were going to do. Excuse me, I'm going to make me some tea after this. And so that's what they were going to do. And so during conversations, we all just clicked right away. We're clicking. And I'm just learning so much about the quilt. I'm learning so much from people. I was interviewing people. There were people who showed up with needle and thread because they hadn't seen their quilt piece since they finished it. And they were like, oh, I might have to do some updates or tweak it. And this one collective of folks, they looked at it and they were telling me, we didn't have to fix a thing. It looks just the way it did when we created it. And that just blew me away. And the AIDS quilt, they have a whole system on how they preserve the quilt. And so that part just blew me away. And so because we gained this connection, I went on tour with them. I traveled with them through the South as they took this quilt across the South to tell more Black and Brown stories. And I ended up going to the kickoff in Jackson, Mississippi, and they held it at the Civil Rights Museum. And it was the kickoff of this Change the Pattern campaign. Cheryl Lee Ralph showed up, and she was coming off her Emmy win. And so she was on fire. Okay. She stood up there and she started singing Endangered Species. We were like, what in the world did I just walk into? It was really, really special. And I wanted to tell the stories. I left there knowing I wanted to tell the stories. I left San Francisco knowing that. And this is an iteration of me telling that story and trying to bring people into the space of being with the quilt, because it's really a spiritual experience. Because while the quilt is out, there's always somebody reading the names of those who are represented on the quilt. So it truly is a memorial. And so I don't know if you could walk through that without crying, because it becomes very real as you hear these names that never stop. They never cease the entire time that the quilt is out. So it's just a very powerful experience, and I wanted to tell that story. And I think our editor for this and our sound designer really brings it alive.
I love that. And the last question that I wrote down to ask you is, what do you look for in queer storytelling, whether that's news, music, podcasts? What excites you?
Things that resonate with me. I look for authenticity. I look for relatability in the stories. And I also, especially with the podcast, I do my best to be balanced. In mainstream news, what bleeds is what leads. Like, that's the line in newsrooms. And that's why every time you turn on the news on the television, it's sad and depressing. It's because what bleeds is what leads, and that's what society expects. Right? They're not expecting for the news to come on and there actually be like a bunch of good news, which is unfortunate. Like, we have created this cycle. And so when it comes to queer news, there's a lot of sad stuff, tragic stuff that's happening today. And so I really do try my best to be balanced with that. I find that politics tends to be the saddest part, but there's so many beautiful things happening in culture and entertainment. And so culture and entertainment gives me an opportunity to share all the good things, all the ways in which we're showing up in the world to counteract what's happening politically. So that's what I try to do. That's what I'm looking for. And if there's any queer artists out here that's tuned in, please email us music@e3radio.fm, because we have a new show called The Queer Open Mic. It's starting on YouTube. Our host is Derek, and we are looking for new ways to amplify queer artists.
I actually have a single coming out this month. I might hit you up for that.
Come on, Alex, let's go.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Anna. It's been great connecting with you and learning so much about what you do.
It's been a pleasure. It's so great meeting y'all. And I love the work that you're doing, right? What you all are doing gives everybody who's listening to this a lot of hope. Let me tell you. So thank you. Yeah.